Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I am joined by the amazing Jesse Krempel. Jesse, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. I just had to unmute myself real quick. I'm doing good, Ken. How are you?
I am doing so well. I'm very glad to have you here. But before we talk about why you're here, Jesse, I would like for the
Mhm.
people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit.
Sure.
Jesse is currently the host and producer of the film history podcast, Cult Cinema Circle, where he and a menagerie of different guests dive into some of the great and not so great cult films that we have the pleasure of seeing. So, in
Mhm.
order to start this podcast, what made you want to do this? What made you want to dive into cult films and the importance of them in cinema history?
Yeah. So for me, I started this when I was unemployed for a minute. I decided to leave a job and I didn't have anything lined up. So I had enough money where I was able to live off that for a bit. And I always wanted to kind of had the idea in my head to start a podcast because I was listening to some of the podcasts that I actually have been able to guest on. I was listening to them actually, and I thought to myself, I was like, these people are literally just normal ass people who do this in their spare time, and I was like, how hard could it be? I guess like why not just and I'm the most inconsistent person in the world, you know what I mean? Like I go to work and I try to make a paycheck and stuff, but like I can't keep on a exercise regimen for shit, and I can't keep on a diet for shit. You know what I mean? But like for me, weirdly enough, this podcast has been one of the most consistent things I've done, which is really crazy. I mean, I went to college and did that kind of shit and stuff, but like, it's been a level of consistency for me, which I thought was really cool. But to answer your question, the reason I wanted to focus on cult films, I didn't want to just have a horror movie podcast because if I wanted to, I could have just done that. But I've always kind of been fascinated by cult films. Everything from, we'll talk about today, a little bit about that. But, I've always kind of been interested in things that are off the beaten path. And maybe
Sure.
movies that didn't maybe get like the critical success or the financial success, but they have garnered a following of people. And I just want to kind of uplift those and talk about them. And also get into like the background of some of these movies and how they came to be. And I also have the moniker of just like, it's my show, I'll do what I want. So if I want to do a Jurassic Park episode, yeah, it made $1 billion, but who cares? I had a guest who wanted to really talk about it. So, but a lot of the time, like as long as it's horror centric or cult centric, I tend to be pretty flexible with what I want to cover. But I generally like to keep the cult just because it's a more interesting thing to talk about, I guess. But that's to answer your question why I made the podcast. And yeah, just thought, why the hell not? And it's over a year strong now, which is really cool.
And it is a special niche, for the whole,
Yeah.
a lot of these movies when they first come out, and two that I always talk about, they got ruined because of bad marketing, were Jennifer's
Mhm.
Body, which I think
Yep.
has come around to become a very loved movie that was completely ruined
Yes.
by its marketing, and
Yeah.
the House of Wax remake. Um,
Yep.
the House of Wax remake, essentially the trailer was, "You hate Paris Hilton, come watch her die in our movie," and it didn't talk about
Yes.
how great the practical effects were, how great the story was. Like, I
Mhm.
really, really love that movie,
Yeah.
and a lot of people that I know now have come around to that movie because
Yeah.
we're past the point of, oh, this is the Paris Hilton gets killed movie. Jennifer's
Yeah.
Body. Come watch this slutty girl in a cheerleading outfit.
Right.
It did not give you the extent, and that to me is one thing that can really kill a movie is the marketing. If you have
Yep.
bad marketing or you mismarket a film, it can become a cult classic, but sometimes it never catches up. It never gets that
Right.
rebound. So maybe somebody can listen to your show and find a movie that they didn't know about, or maybe they
Right.
thought one thing and actually found out another. And the best way for you guys to do that, I have the links down in the description, as well as Jesse's social media account. So make sure you're following on social media. Make sure you're subscribing to the podcast as well. But you've talked about some of the guest spots you've done, whether it be the movies that made us gay, Spectre Cinema Club, Horror Queers. These are things that podcasts that you essentially in your podcast life grew up with and idolizing. What was it like for you to
Yeah.
become guests on these podcasts that meant so much to you getting started?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, for me at least, like I started off with movies that made us gay. I not too long after my pod, I started it. I just messaged Scott and Pete, and I was like, hey, like I love your pod. Like I would love if you guys covered this movie, which is a beautiful thing from 1996. It's a British movie, and I was like, and I would guest on your pod, and they were like, yeah, cool. Like let's figure out a time, and we did it, which was super cool. And but yeah, like having them horror queers was a huge get because I really just reached out to them and was like, hey, I like your podcast and I'd love to be on it. I'm just some little podcast from Maryland, but I would love to come on. And they were so super nice, Trace and Joe. Spectre Cinema, I only listened to so much, but Devon Taylor, who's there, is fantastic. Him and Garrett McDowell, they're fantastic. And I got to talking to Devon, and he's been on my show as well. But seeing these people, it's great. Like I had, you guys just had Girl That's Scary on, and I had them on my pod as well because I goddamn love their podcast. And
Yeah.
so, and they're also DMV girls, so of course I'm like, oh hey, kindreds. But if anything, I feel very honored and very in a way as an atheist blessed to be able to have this kind of community of people, and a lot of the people who I have met or I've talked to or whoever, they've been super cool. And I think that's the big thing, is just uh you never know if you get into someone's DMs, like you might just be able to be like, hey, I think you're cool, or oh hey, I have a podcast, you probably get a billion of these, but like I'm down for it. So, but it's so super cool to get to be a part of these folks' podcasts, and talking about the movies that we like or don't like or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's so super cool. And I don't know if it's surreal necessarily, but it definitely was like, yeah, I never thought that, like, I guess I never really thought like, oh, yeah, I use the horror queers to fall asleep to a little bit, and I was listening to their pod, and then I'd be on it, and I literally
Yeah.
listened to my episode like 5 times when it came out. I was like, this is never gonna. I was like, I don't know, like, not that it won't happen again. I'd love to go on back on their show, but like, I was literally just like, no, I just want to listen to myself on this weird podcast because I was like, not weird, but like, I just wanted to like listen to it because I was just like, holy shit, how did I do that? Like, what? Like, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Like, and that just goes to show that other people, it's hard enough, and you get it as being on social media and having your channel and all that. It's just like, yeah, dude, we do this for fun. A lot of us obviously still have full-time jobs and stuff, so you were doing this as a fun outlet. And um uh, God willing that I haven't run into anybody who's a complete and utter asshole, which is great. So I love
I would
that.
say 95% of the horror community, especially with the podcasting YouTube groups, we're all a pretty tight knit circle, and all we want is for each other to succeed. Like that's the big goal for all of us. I've never once even looked if somebody's been like, "Yo, what would it take for me to be on your My First Horror Movie thing?" I'm like, "Ask." I've never looked what podcast they have, how many subscribers they have. None of that shit matters to me. I'm a kid that grew up in Sand Creek, Michigan, that couldn't talk horror with anybody because nobody loved horror movies. I was a little punk rock kid with green Liberty spikes, and I was fucking weird. And now I have this opportunity to reach out to like-minded people and have these conversations. I'm not going to take this for granted. I would never tell anybody no. I'm looking at you, the movies that made us gay, Spectre Cinema, and Horror Queers. You ever want to come talk about your first horror movie? Let me know. But it is
Go
amazing.
guys, do it.
Even going back and going through some of my own catalog and some of the people that I've met and some of the people that I've become really close friends with, it's surreal. It really
Mhm.
is. And it's growing every day. And I get to meet all these amazing people. And it's seriously a blessing to me. I've gotten to
Yeah.
be in movies. Ash and I are going to be guests at a convention coming up in July.
Mhm.
So, these are the things that I love more. Money's cool. It comes and goes. These relationships, these friendships, more than anything. So,
I
um,
agree.
we talk about the podcast and cult cinema circle, but in order for you to do that and talk about horror movies, Jesse, horror had to start for you somewhere. So now I would like to
Yes.
go back to the past and talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And I can honestly say I have yet to talk about this movie on the podcast, guys. So this is our
Yes.
first time talking about this movie, and I'm so excited. I rewatched it today as just to freshen up. So Jesse, your first horror movie was
My first horror movie. So I had a couple to choose from, I will say. But I would say, truly and honestly, my first horror movie that I remember watching and being there was 1996's The Craft. I will say that I watched this in 1997, 8, something like that. Because I remember being in the old house that doesn't exist anymore. Unfortunately, my childhood home doesn't exist. But
That
um,
sucks.
I remember, I know, right? But like, it was a little whatever, but it was I just remember seeing it like in the old house, in the living room. I can picture what it looked like. And I just was like, we'll talk about the scene that kind of like stuck out in my brain, right? But like this movie, that was probably an early thing of like, oh, whatever this is, whatever horror is, whatever that is, I bangs with it. Now I will say I had some other things like the Goosebumps like Haunted Mask episode. I'm obsessed with that so much. And even like Ghost Story from 1980, I guess. Which I actually recently watched that movie last year, and I actually think it's pretty decent. Like I had those as well, but like truly, utterly, and even Carrie, like I watched that, but I think even before Carrie, because that's one of my favorite horror movies ever. But like
Yeah.
before that, The Craft was something where I was like, oh no, that shit is a little weird, a little scary. Like
Mhm.
that kind of stuck out to me. So that's why I decided to bring it to your show because I thought why the hell not? So, but that was early where I remember like being a child and seeing it, and I was like, what the F is this?
So, I mean, we know you were at your old house, your childhood home, which that sucks. It's
Yeah.
down now. But do you remember who you were with when you were watching it for the first time?
Yes, my older sister, who's about 3 years older than me. I would say that I mean it was just one of those things where I love my mother so much, and being that we were in a position where my mom and my dad were together, but didn't have the best of relationships. But we were kind of left to whatever, we didn't have premium cable or anything, so we weren't watching like Tales from the Crypt or anything, but like, we could kind of watch whatever. Um,
Right.
it wasn't too crazy, and yeah, I think we just came across this either on TV or something like that. I don't know if we rented it or anything. I don't really remember like that, but I just remember like seeing this movie because I remember some of the main parts of it, the main points of it. And yeah, I would say my sister, and also because I grew up with an older sister. I ended up being pretty much raised by a single mom with her and me, so it's one of those things where yeah, it makes sense that like I would have seen this movie that has a very female energy and a very specific type of female energy, but also it was completely written by a man and directed by
Mhm.
a man. So
Well, I'll never forget the first time that we had watched this movie. The scene that really took me out.
Light as a feather, stiff as a board. 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 Light as a feather, stiff as a board.
And I remember me and my cousins trying it, and it just was like the
right.
absolute most ridiculous shit ever. But in the movie, when you see that, and then you see her actually start floating, like that's some crazy shit when you're
You're
10
like,
years old,
shit, this is
Like,
crazy. Oh
oh
my
my
God.
gosh, man. So I definitely understand why it was so impactful for you and why it meant so much to you. But which
Mhm.
was the scene that affected you the most?
So I will say that the scene that affected me the most was spoilers, I guess, for anybody who's never seen The Craft. So what ends up happening is near the end of the movie, Sarah, played by Robin Tunney, in a really horrible wig that is honestly just horror in itself. But she had shaved her head for Empire Records and all. And anyway, so she ends up becoming the ire of one Nancy Downs, played by Fairuza Balk, and her clique of witches, one played by Nev Campbell before she was in Scream, and the other played by Rachel True. And so yeah, they end up kind of going after Sarah because she has kind of broken out of the group, if you will. And they end up coming to her house, and they are fucking with this girl. So they literally glamour something to see to make it seem like her father and stepmother are killed in plane crash. They also literally say, Fairuza Balk's character says, "You're gonna kill yourself tonight," being that Sarah herself has this history of suicidal ideation. And so And then there's just all this stuff where even before that, they're kind of making her envision all of this crazy shit happening in her house. So like you have spiders and scorpions, rats, mealworms, like, and all of this is just like coming out of the sink, coming out of her toilet, and all this shit. And here I am being like 6 years old or 7 years old or however old I was, and just
Yeah.
being like, yo, what the fuck is this? Like, what is it? What is this? Like, and it's just one of those things where, I was scared of the Crypt Keeper growing up, right? So, like, my family will tell you that all the time. But, like, I don't know if this is necessarily scared me, but it was definitely I was like, bro, what the fuck is this? Like, huh? And then the whole triumph of good over evil, quote unquote, whatever. But yeah, no, that was definitely the scene that kind of stuck the most out to me. I mean, of course, you have like the racist Marsha Brady. That wasn't fun, of course. And like, there's not any other like super scary scenes, unless I guess you think like weird domestic violence is scary, I guess, which
Yeah.
of course it is. But like that one to me specifically is very much, yeah, just that stuck out to me as like a kid. I was like, what is this?
And it's funny, you brought it up a little bit. Like Nev Campbell has like a side role in this, and it's funny
Mhm.
seeing her and Skeet Ulrich together in this movie, knowing Scream would come out later this year.
Yeah,
But to go back and see those two together in this movie before they were in Scream, it's just
yeah.
funny to like go back and see that, like Skeet's short hair, and that's another thing. I was like, hey, I forgot he was in this.
He
Um,
is.
so we talked about which scene affected you the most, but what would you say your favorite scene from the film is?
I gotta say, I mean, I love the scene where, God, I'm trying to think real quick. I mean, there is a certain level of just like a chef's kiss when Christine Taylor, racist Marsha Brady, Laura Lizzie, her hair is like falling out and shit. That is a pretty great scene just because like that's what you get for being racist, bitch. So there's
Mm-hmm.
that, but also like even just like them like the girls like kind of coming into their powers a bit as well, and kind of relishing in that. I really like those scenes because a lot of other of the scenes too is just I don't know if it's dour necessarily, but like you some of the other scenes are kind of like, oh, like there's these people are going through some things, you know what I mean? Or like you find out that Sarah has this history of suicidal ideation and has tried to end her life, and all of that stuff, and so some of it's a little heavy depending, um which is crazy that Andrew Fleming tried to get a PG-13 rating, and they were like,
Yes.
nah, you can't, sorry, it's not
Well,
gonna
especially that scene
happen.
you're talking about where they're talking about how she's unlived her, tried to unlive herself before. And she's like,
Yeah.
what about your scars? And then she cuts her.
Oh
Your scars
yeah,
are
it's
open.
crazy.
This isn't real. This isn't real. Then
Yeah.
why are you still bleeding?
Oh my
Like,
God. It's like fucking crazy. I mean, you get to that point where you're like, yeah, I see it's a teen movie, obviously, and it's a teen horror, but it's just something where I'm just like, yeah, no, this got like dark. Like, so, but my favorites are anytime where, it's kind of them like relishing in their power a little bit before it turns left. Do you know what I mean? Because again, it's just kind of that fun, enjoyable, I don't know, if you want to say girl energy is great, although I do have the criticism of that this movie, it's great that there's like these girls in the forefront of it and all that stuff. But this movie isn't exactly it's not the best, I think, but for what it was trying to do, I think it mostly succeeded, but not on everything though.
well, and they just recently tried to rebuild this with the Craft Legacy. So I
Yeah.
always ask people, would you like to see your first horror movie remade, redone? They kind of requeled it, sequeled it a little bit with the Craft Legacy.
And it was
Did you see that?
worse.
And okay,
It
I was
was
just going to ask if you were a
worse.
fan of it. Yeah.
I
Um,
would have been pissed if I paid for it. I got it on Stars or something. So it came
mhm.
with the package or whatever. Um, Shout out Joey Lister Jones. Good for you being able to do this. And it was obviously a movie that meant something to you. I'd watch The Craft, even with its problems. I'd watch The Craft over The Craft Legacy any day. And I could also say, like, oh, The Craft Legacy isn't made for like a 30 something year old man, which is true. It's just, no. Mm-mm-mm.
Yeah.
No.
Didn't see it, so I can't give an opinion either way about it.
You're good.
But yeah, it's one of those movies that I thought The Craft was just fine the way it was. There's no reason to try to build on it, because I know they had a different. Didn't they have The Craft 2 as well?
No, they didn't have the Craft 2 or anything, so it was only the Craft,
And
and
then
then they
The
had
Craft Legacy.
Charmed, obviously,
Yeah.
which was the TV show, which literally stole the kind of trailer music from it was the cover of How Soon Is Now. Kind of took it Charmed kind of took that theme that was in this movie and made it their theme song, which is fun. No, you might be thinking of The Rage Carrie 2, maybe, because that came out in the late
Possibly.
90s as well, which is a
Yeah.
direct sequel to Carrie. But
Carrie, yeah.
yeah, no, but this was, like you were saying, the Craft Legacy itself is the requel. And like I said, I'd put it maybe a little bit over the Black Christmas remake of 2019, but not by much. Not by
Okay.
much.
So I have no interest in watching that.
No.
So Jesse, we've talked about your first horror movie being The Craft and what that movie means to you. But here for a second, I do want to throw you a little bit of a curveball. My little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Jesse? What is your favorite horror movie of all time?
Oh God. Yeah, I mean I have like so many favorites, I guess, but my big one that totally terrified me, by the way. But I would say, I mean, no matter what, bar none, I would have to say my favorite scary movie is Carrie from 1976. That movie to me, I watched it. I remember when I was watching it for the first time, it was at we just moved in to my uncle's old place while he was moving out. And I remember seeing it on TNT. And so it was edited for TV, obviously. But as soon as I saw Sissy Spacek in that prom scene, killing all those fuckers at the prom. That was when I was like, oh, I need whatever this is. Tangentially, I had that beforehand with like Are You Afraid of the Dark, Goosebumps, and some of the other random horror things
Sure.
I saw. But like that to me, I was like, oh no, I need to see more of this. And that
Right.
made me seek out like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff like that. And that kind of started my love of horror. And then also getting into like, any horror literature or any sort of like spooky shows or something and things like that. But Carrie will always be that girl for me. I covered it on Spectre Cinema Club, where we talked about that and the TV remake, which that's a hot mess. But I that will always be my favorite horror movie because it's a horror film, it's a teen film, it's a tragedy film. There's so
Yeah.
much to it, but it is, and nothing holds a candle to that original one. So, debate the wall or whatever, but it's still one of the best horror movies to me, period. Like it just
Love it.
is. It's perfect, and it's like written by this old white man who, has his problems a little bit sometimes too. However, he knows how to write horror and he knew how to write that, which was
Right.
cool. So, and I mean, there's such a level of, I think, catharsis or a level of not admiration, maybe, but like there's a level of just I got you, girl, with a bunch of other horror fans, some of who are queer horror fans, female horror fans, and all of this. I mean, Carrie is in the pantheon to me, so she will always be there for me.
But I can't argue it. Love it. Absolutely love the
Great.
film. Now we've talked about your first horror movie and your favorite horror movie, and I've had a blast hanging out with you, Jesse. But before I let you go, we always bounce
Okay.
back to the same question. We're going to go back to The Craft, and what we're going to do
Okay.
is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking it on acting, production, score, direction, nothing like that. We're not being critics. What we're doing is ranking The Craft on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So, 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Jesse, what would your ranking of The Craft be?
I would say my ranking of The Craft out of skulls would be probably a good 3. Um, like I said before, this movie has some problems. It's not as like woo-woo feminist as maybe it wants to be, perhaps. I don't know. But I do think that overall, though, it was a movie that did affect me at a young age because I just remember it. And it's
Sure.
something where I will go back and watch it, and I will just be like, oh, they did that. That's awesome, and just, how it affected me in that way. I mean, I would give it a good 3. I think that's what I gave it on Letterboxd as well, out of stars. So I
Perfect
would still
score.
give 3 out of 5. I think it's, if you've never seen it, please watch it. Decide for yourself. But especially for before Scream, it was really interesting to also see this as something that was just made because they wanted to. Um,
Right.
Obviously, after Scream, there was all these copycats, but The Craft does have that interesting little bit of like, yeah, it was just made because somebody made up the story and they cast it and made it. And it wasn't because they were trying to capitalize on, something else. So I thought that was kind of
Right.
cool too.
And that ranking works. Now, I did say it at the beginning, guys, but we are at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, I do want to remind you I have all of Jesse's social media links as well as the podcast links all down in the description. So make sure you are liking the podcast, make sure you're leaving a review, subscribing to the podcast, and following Jesse on social media. Jesse, please don't go anywhere. I got a couple more questions for you.
Okay.
Everybody else, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It helps to build the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. Our links are all down in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.